Oh, saya merasa bangga karena konvensional dengan SRI hasilnya lebih banyak SRI daripada dibanding dengan konvensional.
Atas penyampaian saya sangat bangga benar ini Pak dengan adanya hasil tanam seri.
A quiet revolution is taking place on many farms around Indonesia and the world. Farmers like you have been able to increase the yield of their rice crops by 50 to 100% per hectare. But without the use of expensive chemicals, fertilizers or sprays, or expensive new seeds. In fact, it involves no new technology or science. The methods used are modifications of the age-old practices you have done for years. But the results are spectacular. This video has been made to teach you about these new techniques, so that if you wish, you can use them to improve your farm and your rice yield, so that you can in turn benefit by having more food and greater income for you and your family. Around the world, as populations increase and more land is swallowed by the cities, there is an ever greater need for farm production per hectare to increase. Indonesia is a good example. Despite having millions of hectares of land producing rice, there is currently an annual 5 million tonne short supply in this country. They are not alone. Other countries also struggle to feed their population. Perhaps the best possible solution for increasing rice production has been found and is the subject of this video. The System for Rice Intensification, or SRI, has been developed as a method of increasing rice production for farmers. It was developed from initial research completed in Madagascar, but has spread worldwide. The bulk of this video was completed in Indonesia, where SRI methods were trialled by ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, in conjunction with the Indonesian Rice Research Team at Sukamandi, following success achieved internationally. ADRA is a humanitarian organisation with a genuine desire to help others improve their life and their standard of living. The techniques we will teach you involves no new seeds and no new fertilisers or sprays, just a change to the centuries-old way that you grow rice. And the results are excellent. Farmers can generally increase their yield by 40 to 50%, and up to 300% increases in yield have been heard of. Whereas in the past you may have used 50 to 100 kilograms of rice seed per hectare, now you might use 5 to 10 kilograms per hectare. So there are cost savings from using these techniques. Also, our aim is not necessarily that you grow more rice, but if you are using less land to grow the same amount of rice, then you will have more land for growing other crops, such as green vegetables, which you can feed to your family or sell. Some of the farming techniques you see in this video may not be specifically applicable to you. Each country differs to some degree in how it grows rice. What is important is the SRI methods and how you can apply them. We also want you to experiment with the techniques, perhaps on a small plot of land first, and prove that they work for you. In Kupang in West Timor, Indonesia ADRA staff were able to convince only 4 of 250 farmers in one area to trial just a small amount of their land using SRI techniques. The farmers were laughed at early on because the results appeared poor. But at harvest time, these fields were exceptional and the harvest was huge. Afterwards, 200 of the 250 farmers converted to using SRI techniques for growing, and one of the initial 4 farmers converted his whole crops to SRI. These new methods of rice growing have been derived from techniques developed in Madagascar in the early 1980s. The techniques have now spread to 16 different countries, including Myanmar, Cambodia and Thailand, and the methods have been adopted by over 60,000 farmers worldwide. Here is what a few Indonesian farmers had to say about SRI.
Ya, dengan adanya seri ini saya merasa gembira karena yang tahun-tahun yang lewat saya tanam dengan secara tradisional ternyata hasilnya kurang memuaskan. Hanya maksimal rata-rata itu 1 hektar mencapai 4 ton, itu sudah maksimal. Dengan adanya metode seri ini saya merasa senang sekali karena apa? 3 kali 8 meter aja sudah mencapai 12,6 kilogram.
Ini satu jenis tanaman, cuman lain perlakuan. Yang ini SRA, yang ini konvensional. Cuman kalau dilihat dari perbandingan antara SRI dengan konvensional, memang SRI lebih bagus, terutama dari panjang malai, dia cukup panjang. Terus ini dari ukuran malai biji lebih banyak, anakan lebih banyak, akar lebih panjang. Itulah kelebihannya SRI dengan konvensional. Jadi untuk ke depan ini saya ingin mengembangkan terus SRI.
Jadi saya sebenarnya dengan adanya masuk Sri ini, petani kami, kelompok kami khususnya sudah mau melaksanakan dan mengajak tetangga-tetangga istilah kelompok tani yang lain untuk mengikuti tanaman sistem Sri ini.
The techniques involved in SRI are designed to simply allow a stronger plant to grow in the field. Stronger plants have stronger growth and greater yield. There are logical scientific principles behind these techniques that we would like to teach you. It is important for you to understand these also, to see how and why the methods work. The SRI techniques start with seed selection. Only the good seeds are used. But how do you know which seeds are best? Basically, the best seeds are the densest seeds. These will grow the strongest. Start by dissolving 150 grams of salt into a litre of water in a bucket. Add in a handful of seed. The seed which floats is no good and can be skimmed off the top and thrown away. The seed which sinks is denser and is more likely to grow a healthy, strong plant. The rest of the technique for growing seedlings is basically the same as you have been previously doing. But let us recap with some basic common sense rules. Establish a seedling nursery on the highest point of your land. It should be predominantly dry, but with easy access to water as required. Lots of compost should be used in the nursery preparation for maximum seedling growth. Sow the seedlings further apart than you would normally. This will allow for easier transplanting and separation of the small seedlings later. Seed beds should be covered by large plant leaves such as banana leaves to allow the seeds to germinate in relative shade. The planting land should also be carefully prepared. The field is ploughed and compost added. After this, it is raked flat and consistent, just as you normally do. A further technique is to draw a grid on the land at the same time with your rake. More on the reasons for this later. The first main principle to SRI is that the vigorous growth of roots is the key to the plant thriving. Good soil and water conditions, as well as good spacing, allow roots to grow large, deep and strong, giving the plant access to more nutrients and a greater variety of nutrients. But how do you improve the root growth? A number of practices help. Farmers traditionally have transplanted 20 to 30-day-old seedlings into their fields because they think they are more likely to survive. In fact, older seedlings have lost much of their potential for the vigorous growth of tillers and of roots. With the SRI techniques, we transplant seedlings at a very young age, preferably only 8 to 10 days old. These tiny seedlings have just 2 leaves and look very fragile. But if handled carefully and other techniques followed, they have the potential to grow and produce 50 to 60 tillers per plant. The transplant process must be done carefully. The tiny seedlings must be lifted out of the nursery using a trowel or piece of steel as shown here, keeping as much soil attached to the roots as possible. This is to keep the seed sacs attached to the roots. The seed sacs contain nutrients the seedling needs to grow in its early life. When planting, note how the base of the seedling is gently pinched so as to keep the soil attached as it is pulled away from the clump. It is then put carefully into the soil. With careful transplanting, virtually all plants will survive and will quickly resume their growth. Another big change is that seedlings are planted singularly, or at most 2 plants per mound. Not 3 or 4 or more plants as has been the practice. The principle behind this is where more than 2 plants are grouped together, the roots compete for nutrients. The result is a number of substandard plants where 1 thriving plant could be. So use only 1 plant. You can always save a few spare plants in your seedling nursery to replace the small percentage that might not survive planting. This is a mature field of plants grown singularly. Note how the individual plant has much more tillers and bigger tillers than this clump grown together. Another big change in technique is the spacing between plants. Remember that grid marked earlier? We would encourage you to start planting in a grid pattern with a 25 centimetre spacing between plants. By spacing the plants out more than traditionally, the plants no longer compete with each other for nutrients and the roots grow deep and strong. The result is again a stronger, healthier plant with more tillers and better root structure, leading to greater yield per hectare. Over time, this grid pattern can be increased to 30 or 40 or even 50 centimetres apart. In Madagascar, 4 plants per square metre is being used, but only after years of SRI use on these fields. The reason for this is that after a few years of SRI, the amount of nutrients in the soils actually increases. The second main principle is that the plant needs well-aerated soil, at least during its period of vegetative growth, not flooded fields as we traditionally have done. This is perhaps the most radical departure from traditional techniques. Rice fields are not flooded during the growing season. Instead, they are simply kept moist. This allows the soil to remain aerated so that oxygen and nitrogen can get around the roots. The principles behind this are simple. Rice, like any other plant, needs to breathe. If there is a layer of water, then this cuts the root off from oxygen that is needed for the root to grow and remain healthy. When rice plants are grown in flooded fields, their roots start to disintegrate and form air pockets that permit some oxygen to get into the tissues and survive. But the root structure is comparatively weak and unhealthy, as around 3/4 of the root has died by the time the plant begins flowering and starts forming grains. Because rice is a hardy plant, it can survive standing in water, but it doesn't thrive. Plants grow much better in well-drained fields. Water management is recommended. By applying small amounts of water once a day, the soil is kept moist, not saturated. If water is applied in the evening, any excess still standing in the field in the morning should be drained off, so the soil is open to the oxygen in the air and the warmth of the sun. Also, several times during the growing period, the field should be left unwatered for 3 to 6 days, so that the soil dries out until surface cracking starts to occur. Later, when the flowering begins, a thin layer of water, 1 to 2 centimetres deep, is kept over the field until 10 to 15 days before harvesting. At this time, the field is drained and kept dry until the grain ripens. There is another method of water management that requires less labour and gives good results. This method is to alternatively flood the fields and then to drain and dry the field for alternate periods of 3 to 6 days. You should use your judgment on the length of time for rotation, but work on the basic principles of keeping the soil moist but not saturated, so the roots are not deprived of oxygen for very long. A week of flooding is probably all the roots can tolerate before damage sets in. This is one of the most radical departures from your normal methods of growing rice. But trust us, it does work. One of the downsides of SRI growing techniques is that weeds grow more easily in the unflooded rice fields. Weeding must be taken seriously. Weeding helps aerate the soil, which is good for the rice plant, and again helps the root structure to develop. It also stops the weeds competing with the rice for nutrients. The benefits of weeding well outweigh the labour required. 2 weedings starting about 10 days after transplanting are the minimum needed. However, many farmers have found that additional weedings are very profitable, as they aerate the soil at the same time as they remove the weeds. Adding weeding sessions beyond the minimum of 2 sessions can increase yields per hectare by 500, 1,000 and even 2,000 kilograms per hectare. Automated weeding may be possible if you have the right tools. This mechanical weeder is very effective at aerating the soil and has the additional benefit of burying the grown weed, which then composts and feeds the rice plant. The weeder is a relatively cheap tool and its use is encouraged. A third key principle of SRI is soil health. For soil to be healthy, it must be loose and not compacted, and must have plenty of organic matter to support biological activity. By biological activity, we are talking about millions of tiny bacteria, funguses and protozoa that feed on organic matter. Most of these are beneficial to rice plants and help keep pests and disease in check. These unseen creatures help keep the soil fertile also. This is because some of the microbes in the root zone of the rice plants are able to take nitrogen from the air and turn it into a form which is absorbed through the roots of the rice plant. This is therefore a free form of nitrogen fertilizer and is very beneficial to plant growth. All you have to do is provide compost to the plants. Compost provides nutrition for both microorganisms and larger insects such as earthworms, ants and termites. These creatures in turn make the earth more fertile by creating air tubes and facilitating the breakdown of organic matter that the rice plant can use. Farmers often find that the best way to use compost is adding it to the field in the season before they grow the rice. Often this will be with an inter-season crop such as potatoes or beans. As well as benefiting the inter-season crop, this allows the full decomposition of the compost to benefit the rice crop that follows. Compost is basically decomposing plant matter, and any form of compost is better than none. So use what you have available. In summary, the SRI techniques are all about plant health. If there is a large, healthy root system growing in well-aerated, fertile soil, the rice plants will develop many more tillers, of which more will be fertile. The fertile tillers will develop more grains and larger grains. The SRI techniques are about the basic ideas of how rice plants grow best. The ideas are not applied singularly, but together, so that their effects are multiplied together. That's why the farmers who use SRI techniques are able to make significant gains with their yields of rice. We must also warn you that the very early results will not look good. You will think the plants look weak and poor quality, but that will change. Here's what one farmer experienced.
Saya dulu sebelum ada metode SRI itu nanam sawah itu kurang berhasil. Sekarang semenjak ada program SRI, saya mencoba sedikit. Dari ukuran itu saya ada peningkatan yang bagus gitu, yang bisa berpenghasilan tinggi. Terus saya nyoba lagi 1/4 hektar. bisa dapat hasil 1 ton 800, tapi sebelum memakai SRI cuman 1 ton 100. Sekarang ini saya mau mencoba mengajak kawan-kawan untuk pakai metode SRI supaya peningkatan hasil lebih bagus.
Let's review those techniques again. Firstly, select the strongest seeds by putting them into salty water. The best seeds sink as they are denser and will grow better. Add compost to the field to give it more organic matter. This will help maintain the good structure and good health of the soil. Prepare the field well. Plant the seedlings very young, ideally around the 8 to 10 day mark. Transplant these young seedlings quickly and gently from the nursery and into the field, taking care that the roots are not damaged. They should be placed in the soil in a way that the plants can quickly resume their growth. Plant the seedlings at least 25 centimetres initially, and plant single seedlings rather than clumps of multiple seedlings. The single seedling will grow much stronger. Keep the rice field well drained and avoid flooding during the growing period up until the time of flowering. After that, the field can have a thin layer of water, 1 to 2 centimetres, and this should be drained 10 to 15 days before harvesting to allow the rice to ripen. Weed the fields at least twice, either by hand or, better still, a rotary hoe. Some of you will be very inspired by what you have seen. Others will be more sceptical. In the foreground are crops grown using SRI techniques, the others in the background by traditional methods. Here's what other farmers have to say about growing rice using SRI techniques.
Yang pertama, belum tanam seri para bapak dan ibu sekalian, kemarin 1 meter persegi hanya mendapat 7 on. Namun setelah kami mengikuti pola seri, yaitu dalam adra masuk ke kampung kami, pada saat ini 1 meter persegi mendapat 10 on per meter persegi. Jadi pada saat ini kami sangat bangga.
We would encourage you to attend any meetings on SRI that are held in your local area, and we always invite discussion on these techniques. Rice researcher Anish Kangani had this to say about SRI.
SRI ini mengejutkan bagi petani, bahkan bagi sebagian teman-teman peneliti. Umumnya petani tidak percaya bahwa dengan menanam bibit muda yang tunggal itu kita akan mendapatkan hasil lebih baik, apalagi dengan penambahan bahan organik. Namun setelah mereka melihat hasilnya di lapangan, mereka terkejut. Wow, kok bisa demikian ya? Memang demikianlah. Sehingga saya pikir secara otomatis SRI ini akan berkembang di antara petani sendiri. Karena mereka melihat dan mencobakan dan mengetahui hasilnya.
If you are interested in adopting the SRI methods of rice growing, then perhaps take the time to watch this video again and take complete notes. If you are a little skeptical, then perhaps start small by using these techniques on only some of your land and see the difference for yourself. We would strongly recommend a period of experimentation of the different techniques to see what's best for you. For example, you may get better results planting your seedlings 30 centimetres apart rather than 25 centimetres apart. Try things and see what works for your land. But the question really is, if we can absolutely guarantee improved yields overall in your fields if these techniques are used, can you afford not to try? We would like to wish you the best of success. Good luck.